What's up, BookTube, and welcome to my top 10 reads of 2020. So it took me a while to narrow down these books. A little about me: I primarily read horror and thriller. Sometimes I throw in a little postmodern, a little bit of classics, but mainly I read horror and thriller. So my top 10 books are they are entirely horror and thriller books, hence the title of this. Just because I rated these books in a certain order and you thought they were better than my rate does not invalidate your opinion. This just happens to be my opinion. I read about 56 books, I believe, this year, so getting down to this top 10 was quite the challenge, but I think I have done it. If you follow me on Goodreads, you might see that some of these books have lower ratings than other books that I didn't make it on the list. The way I chose my books for my top 10 was based on how they resonated with me throughout the year. So if there was a book that maybe has 4 stars, but I really liked the originality of it, or I really liked the style, that might have stuck with me more than, say, Red Dragon or Silence of the Lambs by Thomas Harris, which both received very high ratings from me, lots of praise, but didn't actually make it into my top 10. So I'll go through the ratings as I go through the books, and I just want to clarify that these are my top 10 reads of 2020, and they aren't all books that came out in 2020. Some came out in 2019, some came out before then, but it's just the books that I discovered and I read this year. But yes, there are some 2020 releases in here. So let's get started. Okay, so coming in at number 10, we have Stephen King's The Institute. This was a 5-star read from me. I loved it. I got it right at the end of 2019 and read it throughout the first couple months in 2020. It, to me, is very akin to Stephen King's book It, which, if you follow me on Bookstagram, you know is my all-time favorite novel ever. I really loved this book because I love how Stephen King writes adolescence, and I really like how he writes coming-of-age stories. I felt that this was a great coming-of-age story with a little bit of a supernatural twist. It's all about a government conspiracy of taking telepathic children and telekinetic children and using them in a government facility. It's very original, it's very fun, it's written in a very unique style for King, and I was thoroughly impressed with it. I'm a diehard King fan, so that's definitely why this guy made the list. Coming in at number 9 is, oh gosh, I'm so sorry if I say this wrong, John Avide Lindqvist. I'm so sorry, I know I said that terribly. This is Let the Right One In. This is a Swedish novel that was written, I believe, in 2004. It was turned into 2 different movies, one Swedish and one American. And I loved the films. I've always wanted to read this, and I can safely say that this may be the best vampire book I have ever read. If you are into classic literature, there are tons of allusions to Nabokov and Dostoevsky, as well as Bram Stoker, of course, and I think this is a very, very unique tale of vampires, as well as maybe a love story, and definitely a huge commentary on the vampire's familiar, which I do think is something that's taken for granted a lot in vampire lore, but it's something that is extremely important. I believe this can also be filed under like that Nordic noir category. I really love it. It is definitely not for the faint of heart. There are definitely some kind of Lolita style things in this novel that I found extremely disturbing, hence the 4-star rating. There are topics in this book that I'm very uncomfortable with, which is why it was a 4-star rating and not a 5-star rating for me. But I did love this book. It is beautifully written. It is a very unique story. And it made me uncomfortable, which is what a lot of horror novels are supposed to do. So even though it wasn't a full 5-star read, because I did find it to be a little too graphic at points, I do understand why it is such an important modern-day vampire novel and why it is such a classic in contemporary horror. Alright, coming in at number 8 is Hex by another author whose name I'm going to probably mispronounce. This is Thomas Oldhuyvelt. I'm not sure. This is a witch book. This is set in, I believe, the Hudson Valley in New York State. though the original Dutch translation, I believe, does take place in Holland. This book is extremely original. I've never read anything like it. Gets a lot of flack for being the type of book that it is. It does have a very strange ending that I know a lot of people do feel many different ways towards. I didn't actually mind the ending too much, but it's basically a story about, I guess, almost like I think it's a 1600s witch. Does it say? I'm not sure. Anyway, it's about an old witch who has placed a curse on a town, and now the town is dealing with this witch in the 21st century. So yes, there is technology. Yes, there is full public awareness of the members of the town of this cursed witch and how they deal with it, but also keep their secret from the rest of the world. It's very scary. It's very dark. It's very disturbing. And it's very, very, very well done. It's extremely unique. Like I said, I've never read anything like it, and I highly, highly, highly recommend this to anybody who likes any type of witch lore, because it is quite the original take on something that I feel it gets very overdone very often. Oh, and this was a 4-star read for me. I loved this book quite a lot, but like I said, the ending is a little strange. I wasn't fully satisfied with it, so that is where that 4 stars do come in. But again, it's like nothing else I've ever read before, so it really did resonate with me. Okay, every other book on this list will be a 5-star read for me, so I'm not going to go through the stars anymore, but those were the 3 where it's kind of weird. When I get a little further in, I'll explain why a 5-star King book came, after 2 4-star reads. But next up is Devolution by Max Brooks. You guys might know Max Brooks as either the son of Mel Brooks or as the writer of World War Z. The book, not the film. So this is a journal entry style, almost like found footage kind of book, all around Sasquatch lore. I love cryptids. I found this book incredibly fun, incredibly engaging, not super realistic, and the characters in this book weren't the most likable people, but I did find all of the Bigfoot stories, actions, interactions really fun, really creative. I don't really see a lot of cryptid lore. I see a lot of cryptids on like bad dramatized TV, but nothing really done this way. So I found this really fun. I liked that it was written in journal entries, and I do actually have a signed copy with a signature. I got this at Politics and Prose in DC, where you do get the chance to get signed copies every now and then. So yeah, I was very, very excited about this. If you like cryptids, definitely check this one out. All right, coming in at number 6 is Home Before Dark by Riley Sager. I hope that's how you say that last name. I love Riley Sager. I know a lot of people don't like his work because they don't like the twists at the end, or they don't like how all of his endings are some weird, strange, you didn't see that coming. I actually love that stuff. This book kept me guessing and on my toes the entire time. It is about a girl who inherits a manor from her father, which is the same manor that he claimed was haunted and wrote a book about that basically launched him to international fame. His daughter Maggie has never believed in the ghosts and is now going to return to find out if the ghosts are real or not. It sounds a little cliche. It sounds kind of like a Darcy Coates novel, actually, but it's very, very different. It's very unique. Every time you think you know what's going on, they throw something else in, and all of a sudden everything is flipped on its head, and you have no idea what's going on until you get to that very final conclusion where everything falls into place and really makes sense. And so that's why I like Riley Sager, because I feel like I am always on some kind of journey with him. His writing is very fast and fun. It's very easy to read. So I'm a big, big, big fan of his work, and this was one of my most anticipated reads of 2020. So glad I got around to that. All right, coming in at number 5 is My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix. I started reading Grady Hendrix this year when I discovered his 2020 release, The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, and while I loved that book, I picked this one up and I loved it even more. I love the nostalgia in this book. I love the overall love of the horror genre that Hendrix puts into this book, and the thing is just an overall blast to read. If you haven't heard of this book, it is about two best friends in the 80s in Charleston, South Carolina, and one of the friends believes that her best friend has been possessed by a demon. It's basically a play on the famous story, The Exorcist, that we all probably know, but with a very campy twist, I want to say, which makes it both terrifying and fun at the same time. Coming in at number 4 is the unabridged version of The Stand by Stephen King. I spent most of the year reading this thing. It's very long. It's a bit of a trek to get through, but it is quite a masterpiece. And this is actually the reason why The Institute, even though it was a 5-star read for me, was ranked at the bottom of my list, because when it comes to Stephen King, I hold his rating on a completely different pedestal than I hold everybody else's, because he is my favorite author. So while I loved The Institute, when I read something like The Stand, you just can't even compare the two. This is just, it's so brilliant, it's so dense, there's so much character development and such a massive winding story, and I really do love it. I will say there are some definite flaws with this book, so it has not beaten out it as my all-time favorite novel. I do think that there are certain characters like Stu Redman and Franny Goldsmith that a lot of people love, but I don't. It definitely drags a little bit in the middle, and the ending felt very rushed to me. As a Stephen King fan, I'm used to that by now. But I did really, really enjoy this whole journey, especially reading it during 2020, which felt very appropriate. And I have to say that I discovered Harold Lauder, who has become my favorite character, I think, in literature. Which I know if you've read the book, you're going to be like, wait, what? Your favorite character is Harold? But hear me out. I love characters with really, really well-developed story arcs and with origins where you can see how they got from point A to point B and have perfect clarity on it. For example, I loved Ramsay Bolton in Game of Thrones. I know a lot of people hated him and he was a very despicable character, but he was my favorite character to watch. And I love Harold Lauder because I found his story fascinating. I wanted to read every single chapter about Harold. I was so invested in everything that he did. Whether it was good or bad, I wanted to know what Harold was up to. And he's one of the few characters that has ever really gripped me that way. So I loved this. This was quite the journey, and I'm so happy. If you haven't read this, this is debatably supposed to be the best post-apocalyptic novel ever written, and was definitely a great read for 2020. Okay, coming in at number 3 is Heartshaped Box by Joe Hill. So if you don't know, Joe Hill is Stephen King's son. He has a very unique writing style. He writes a lot of like darker goth kind of rock star characters, which really speaks to me. I am that cliche, but this was highly, highly recommended to me by many, many people. I have read his other books, Horned and Nosferatu, before, and this one literally almost had me in tears at one point. This is the story of a rock star named Judas Coyne and his girlfriend Georgia, who purchase a haunted suit on the internet. I believe it's like an off eBay kind of site, and are then haunted by the spirit within the suit. Sounds like a very, very simple concept, but it is a very deep, emotional novel. If anybody has ever had any experiences with depression or anxiety or mental health issues, this is a book that is very, very, very in tune with those issues. It talks a lot about mental health in America and a lot of darker subject matters, which are more rooted in reality than they are in the supernatural. This is a very emotional, a very human book, and I love this book. This was definitely a toss-up in my top 3. It was very hard to narrow down which were my top 3 books. It kind of went back and forth. I highly, highly, highly recommend this book, but again, it is dark. It will break your heart. It is a very, very beautiful, beautiful book. So definitely number 3 for me. Coming in at number 2 is Mr. Paul Tremblay's A Head Full of Ghosts. I was very hesitant to read this book because the movie The Exorcist terrified me when I was a kid and has to this day scared me, and a book that is basically not like my best friend's Exorcism, which is kind of a comedy, but a very, very serious book. I was very hesitant to read, but then I picked it up and I read the entire thing in like a day. I couldn't put it down. If you are a fan of Shirley Jackson's We Have Always Lived in the Castle or Mark Danielewski's House of Leaves, this is pretty much a love letter to both of those books. He cites many, many things from those books in this novel, and it is another book that is talking not only about demons and possession, but also about the harsh realities that exist in today's world, especially when it comes to religion as well as mental health. And it's also just a full-on love letter to the horror genre. So I found this both engaging and disturbing at the same time. It's another book that I felt very, very close to. I really like how Tremblay approached mental health in this novel. I really like how he approaches the internet age, and I really like how he talks about reality TV and society as a whole in this. It's a very good commentary on many things that happen in general society while being a very good, scary book. So this is a number 2. I really highly recommend it. This year I also read Cabin at the End of the World by Paul Tremblay, which I did love, but nowhere near as much as this. So this book blew me away. I can't recommend it enough. I've already said that like 4 times, but yeah, I love this book. Okay, so before I get to my top book of all, I want to throw in just a few honorable mentions. As I mentioned, I read Red Dragon and Silence of the Lambs by Thomas Harris for the first time. I also was talking about Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix, which was a 2020 release that I really loved. I also picked up Kill Creek, which is by, I believe, Scott Thomas. Yes, which I really enjoyed. That was a really fun read. Not quite good enough to make my top 10, but definitely worth the shout out. And of course there was also Horns by Joe Hill, which if you would like another book to break your heart, get on that. So last but not least, let's go into book number 1. This is Clown in a Cornfield by Adam Cesare. I'm so sorry if I say your last name wrong. I've never heard it spoken out loud. Cesare, I don't know. Clown in a Cornfield. This was my most anticipated read of 2020. Like I said, it is my favorite novel of all time, so hey, slashers with clowns, so down. This is another book I couldn't put down. The only reason I put it down is because I literally had to go to work, and the whole time I was at work, I was like, I just want to get home and finish this book. I ended up finishing it at like 4 in the morning on like a Tuesday. It is so good. So a lot of you have probably heard of this book and are going, why is there a YA book at the top of your horror/thriller best books of 2020? Because even though this is marketed as YA, I wouldn't even consider it YA. It's probably YA because all of the main characters are teenagers, but like, what slasher doesn't have the main characters being teenagers? It is gory, it is suspenseful, it is really well written, it is so much fun. It is literally a book about teenagers at a party in a cornfield that gets completely massacred by an evil clown named Friendo. I really just want to leave it at that because to me this was like reading a great slasher movie from the 70s or 80s. It was just all over the place fun. It felt very similar to the original Friday the 13th, if I have to compare it to anything. And I'm really into creepy clowns. So this for me was definitely the book that I didn't know if I would love it when I first got it. I liked the concept. I had seen really good reviews from critics. And then once I got into it, I got so invested in the characters, in the story of the town, and in our villain, our red-nosed villain. So it didn't feel cliche to me. Again, I think another reason I love this is because you can tell it is very much a love letter to the slasher genre, which, I mean, what horror fan doesn't want to read this? So I'm totally rambling about this book because I'm really just trying not to spoil how great it is, but I do highly recommend this book. And there you have it. Those are my top 10 best horror or thriller reads of 2020. I'm about to do, I think, a video on my most anticipated reads, along with a couple unboxing videos on some of my book subscription boxes, and some reviews of newer books that either came out in late 2020 or coming out now in 2021 that I'm really excited to get my hands on. So be sure to be on the lookout for that, and thank you guys so much. Mwah. See you next time.